Thank you very much, Heidi, and thank you, everybody. I would like to thank the organisers for inviting me here, and say I'm very pleased to be here. I'm the coordinator of the Publish What You Pay National Coalition in the UK. I'm also the coordinator of the civil society network that is involved in the UK EITI, and I'm a UK civil society representative on the EITI. And what I'm going to do in my 15 allotted minutes is try to sketch out very briefly how I see the international perspective on transparency in the oil, gas and mining industries. And I'm going to speak for roughly 5 minutes each on 3 themes. The first theme is, why is transparency important in the international extractive sector? How does civil society see its importance? Secondly, what progress is being made and has been made in promoting transparency in the extractives globally? And thirdly, what challenges do we face in achieving greater transparency? So some of you may have heard the phrase resource curse or paradox of plenty. There's 2 phrases. What do people mean when they talk about the resource curse? Since about the 1990s, there's been a great deal of political and economic and social analysis identifying how developing countries that are particularly rich in natural resources, oil, gas and minerals, tend to exhibit the same symptoms of bad forms of development, undesirable forms of development: corruption, mismanagement of funds, poor governance, lack of regulatory effectiveness, and negative developmental outcomes for ordinary people. So you have communities living near extraction sites that are suffering social, economic and human rights impacts. They're losing their livelihoods. Very often income inequality increases, inequality in wealth increases. You have human rights abuses. You even have violent conflict, and I'll give some examples. So this is all associated with the oil, gas and mining industries, and it's important because of the size of these industries and the size of the flows of wealth, income and money that they generate. There are some good examples, and examples that are often cited are Norway, which has been very successful in managing its North Sea oil, and Botswana, which has been relatively successful in managing its diamond wealth. The size of the sector of oil, gas and minerals is vast. For example, the exports of oil, gas and minerals from Africa, Asia and Central and South America in 2012 were worth an estimated $1.35 billion, 15 times the value of official development assistance to those countries in that year. These resources are non-renewable. There's only one chance for poor countries that do have oil, gas and minerals to successfully exploit them. And associated with the extractive industries is a great deal of illicit financial flows. For example, in Africa, an estimated $50 billion is lost every year associated with oil, gas and minerals industries by money not going into the state coffers, but being misappropriated, corruptly spent, siphoned off into international bank accounts, into shell companies and so on, secrecy. And here's some examples of this problem. Nigeria, it's estimated that $20 billion of sales by the national oil company have been lost in recent years. And there's violent conflict, as we know. Poverty is increasing. The Niger Delta, which is rich in oil, used to be self-sufficient in food and used to export food to the rest of the country. Now it's hugely dependent on importing food because agriculture has been destroyed there. Democratic Republic of Congo, 5 mining deals in 2010 to 12 that were linked to an offshore holding company owned by a foreign billionaire. I won't name him, but I could, allegedly cost the country $1.4 billion, which was 7% of the national income. Zambia, in 2005 to 6, lost $100 million in unpaid corporation tax and royalties from mining companies. And there are other examples. You could think of Angola, Equatorial Guinea, even more developed countries like Brazil, Guatemala, the Philippines, Indonesia, Peru. It's a widespread problem. So if that's the problem, what's the progress being made? And Heidi mentioned some of the initiatives. What civil society wants to achieve to address this resource curse is to see natural resource wealth invested in development that benefits ordinary citizens. So it goes into health, education, infrastructure, and economic diversification, so that when the oil and the minerals and the gas have run out, or when global warming makes it impossible to exploit more, there will be other sources of wealth for the country. And how do we get there? Transparency is an important aspect. Transparency leads to accountability. And that's an important part of the solution, if not the whole solution. By transparency in the extractive industries, civil society has come to mean country-by-country reporting by each active company at a project level of its payments to the governments. So every payment an oil company makes to the government, to any branch of a government in the country where it operates, for extracting that resource is reported by the company, ideally also reported by the government. This enables civil society in the country to hold the government to account, say, where is that money? We know you've been paid this much money for this project. What are you doing with it? According to the contract or according to the law, a percentage of this money should go to the local authority to benefit local communities. Show us how you're spending it. It also enables global civil society to say to the companies, okay, you paid this amount of money to the government for this particular oil concession, for example. We don't think that that's a reasonable price. Or there are other examples where payments are made that are completely opaque, that research shows have actually gone into the pockets of government ministers or their families or their friends and not to the public benefit. And it's been established that countries that control corruption and improve governance are found generally to improve their developmental outcomes. So, as Heidi mentioned, in 2003, the EITI was established, largely as a result of civil society pressure. And around the same time, NGOs, initially in the UK, but moving globally, gradually, founded the Publish What You Pay movement, which acts as a watchdog both within the EITI and beyond the EITI, campaigning for mandatory company reporting of payments. As Heidi mentioned, the EITI is voluntary for countries. The government decides to join the EITI and then sets up a structure for the companies that make payments to that government to report them, and it reports its receipts. But mandatory reporting has now been implemented in the EU under the 2013 Accounting and Transparency Directives, and now every EU member state is implementing. And what this means is that if you take the example of my own country in the UK, every international oil, gas and mining company that is either incorporated in the UK or publicly raises money on the London Stock Exchange from 2016, from next year, will have to start reporting every payment it makes to every government anywhere in the world where it extracts resources above a certain threshold, which is 100,000 euros. So there's going to be a huge amount of data flowing from 2016. Norway has also implemented similar laws, and companies in Norway are already reporting. Canada has recently introduced a law, and Canadian mining companies will be reporting from next year. And the first country that introduced this law was the United States with the Dodd-Frank Act in 2010. Unfortunately, the ability of companies to litigate in the United States has caused real problems. So the oil companies, led unfortunately by Exxon, Chevron, Shell and BP and Total, the bad five, have taken the US government, the Securities and Exchange Commission, to court. They achieved the vacation, as it's called, of the first set of rules for reporting in the US. That happened in 2012 and 2013. And the US government is now reintroducing, or is being obliged to reintroduce rules for reporting and that's going to happen in the coming months. The problem in the US is that the government fears that the oil companies will litigate again, and that will be a great pity. But civil society is working very hard in the US and in other countries to ensure that this very important jurisdiction and market comes into line with what is now the global extractive industry transparency standard. The main difference between the EITI and mandatory reporting under the EU directives and other laws, as Heidi said and I repeated, the EITI is voluntary for governments. Mandatory reporting, once it's law, it's compulsory for companies. The EITI does have certain advantages. It brings together the multi-stakeholder groups, so civil society gets to sit around the table with government and industry. That's particularly valuable in countries where civil society doesn't have much voice, but even we found in the UK it's been important and valuable. There are also opportunities to innovate. So, for example, in Liberia, the EITI initiative is including forestry, where there's been a lot of corruption and illegal activity. In Senegal, the EITI is covering fisheries, where there are, again, big issues of accountability. And in the United States, the EITI is including renewable energy. Problem with EITI data is that the reports of the companies are usually published about 2 years or sometimes even longer after the payments are made. And the other big drawback is that corruption-prone countries such as Angola and Russia will not sign up to the EITI, although Angola is rumoured to be thinking about it. But to get global coverage, we really do need mandatory reporting. So one key important point that I would make for you in Germany, just like for us in the UK, it's important that our countries where we don't suspect significant issues of corruption, but it's important that we show the world that we are willing to check that we are transparent domestically, just as we're asking developing countries and their governments to be. We show that we're willing to not just impose a standard in a neo-colonial way, but we are willing to walk our own talk, and we're willing to make the effort that shows that it can be done. And it does involve a lot of work, as I'm sure you're finding in Germany. It's not easy to produce a good EITI report, but it's important that the OECD countries show that they are willing to participate. There is a key role for civil society in all of this. We are watchdogs within the initiative, and this very week the EITI International Board is meeting in Bern, and there are a lot of issues around within the Secretariat and within some of the governments, there are moves to begin to weaken the EITI current standard because countries are seen as struggling to implement all the details. But in civil society, generally, there's a strong belief that the standard has only just been strengthened in 2013. It's too early to weaken it, and we are fighting very hard to maintain it as strong as possible. So that's the progress. So finally, my last few minutes, just to speak about some of the challenges we face currently and looking ahead. There are people here I know from Open Knowledge, and one of the emerging issues around extractive reports by companies is the importance of open data. It's really important that companies don't simply publish a PDF on their website, can get buried in the sustainability section. Some PDFs, as you know, you can't even copy and paste from if you want to check the figures or analyse them. So we've been pushing very hard in the UK, and we have a government commitment to implement the G8 Open Data Charter and apply it to extractive reporting. We hope the same will happen in Germany. I believe the Netherlands government has committed to it. Not many other EU governments have. So we're for the more technically minded, we're going to have CSV files, which data people will be able to easily copy, to manipulate, to machine read, and to analyse the data. We see that as very important. One of the challenges as a civil society movement we have is to develop the skills, learning from people like Open Knowledge, so we can use this data and we can work with colleagues in developing countries in Angola, in Nigeria, in Peru, in the Philippines and Indonesia, who are very concerned about the revenues, work with them to analyse what the companies are paying, what their governments are getting. we're going to have to defend this standard. This is a political challenge. In 2018, the European Commission is required to review and assess the implementation of the EU directives. And my own government in the UK has decided to do its own review 1 year earlier in 2017. And we know one of the repeated arguments from the companies, and it's still happening in the context of the EU, is that it's costly, it's too expensive for the companies to implement, and it creates competitive disadvantage. And even in the last few months, I'm aware of one European international oil company that has been pressing one government in the EU to with its concerns about competitive disadvantage for EU companies as opposed to US companies because the rules have not yet been applied. So we can expect some pushback from industry. Not every company is against this form of transparency. They all say they favour transparency, but till now, from the UK perspective, we've seen certain companies that have gone ahead of the law, such as Tullow Oil, Statoil in Norway, Cosmos, Rio Tinto, BHP Billiton, the world's biggest mining company. They've shown they're willing to do it, and they've already started reporting voluntarily. But we believe that some of the oil companies are going to put up a bit of a fight. So we have to prove by 2017, 2018 that we use this data, that it's valuable, and that it delivers benefits. We want to see the standard go further, so we want to see it extend beyond the EU and the US and Norway and Canada. Australia is home to many of the world's biggest mining companies. We want to see Australia bring in similar rules. We want to see Switzerland bring in transparency for commodity trading. Switzerland is the world's greatest commodity trading hub, and either today or tomorrow there's actually a meeting in Bern connected with the EITI board meeting at which colleagues from civil society in Switzerland and also from international civil society will be arguing very strongly to see Switzerland introduce transparency for commodity traders such as Trafigura, Vitol, and so on. And in the UK, London is also a very major commodity trading hub. And through the Open Government Partnership, we are now trying to get the UK government to commit to introduce transparency for commodities as well. We also want to see wider and deeper data published. In the broader tax transparency debate, and there's a whole global issue, as leading politicians are aware and trying to some extent to respond through the OECD, major companies are not paying very much tax very often, yet society's needs are growing and companies' profits are growing. So we would like to see publication of contracts, we would like to see publication of production volumes, employee numbers, sales and profits, so that you can relate the profits that a company is making to the tax that it is paying, and there will be discrepancies there. This is the data needed to expose tax dodging through, for example, trade mispricing. Payment and revenue transparency and accountability are also bridged to wider kind of accountability. For example, company reporting on impacts on livelihoods, on human rights, environment, and so on. And in connection with the environment, I was very pleased to see the letter from international CSOs, including the Heinrich-Böll Foundation, to the EITI board, asking for the EITI to introduce reporting on global warming emissions as part of its mandate. I think that would be excellent. Impacts on impacts on local communities are a huge issue in the extractive industries, and the lack of access to remedy for those communities. The lack of free, prior and informed consent for communities when a company starts to extract minerals on their traditional lands. And transparency on political lobbying. These are all challenges that civil society sees as extensions of this first gain that we've made on payment and revenue transparency. And lastly, I think you could go even beyond that, and it is happening within the Publish What You Pay movement. For example, in the Philippines, in Niger and Mali, civil society activists don't only know what want to know what the companies are paying and what their governments are receiving. They want a say in how the governments spend that money. So then you reach the next sort of step in the chain, if you like, participatory budgeting and expenditure monitoring. There's a huge global movement working specifically on that. And I see it's a great potential area for the Publish What You Pay transparency movement to make contact with that movement working for greater accountability for expenditure. Thank you very much.